All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is a belated April edition of TVDE. I did a bad job of inviting, and Bruce and I and one other person joined the earlier version of this. Outwork got in the way a little bit. I think it didn't tell everyone that this meeting was happening on April 4th. So we'll do it again. And so here we are today. Thank you for those who can be here. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we turn it over to Bruce. If you want to be added to the list or add a colleague, please email us. You can email me or tvde@infova.com. Your feedback is always welcome on the format or topics for future. We are recording today's section, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. And finally, future topics include, this is pretty exciting. We have lined up David Hay for next month. David is a renowned author about data modeling, and he and I met at a conference recently, and I asked him to present, and he said he will in May. And then in June, Troy and Kai from St. Luke's will share their data governance journey. They've got an award-winning team and an award-winning presentation that I saw down at the HIMSS conference. And so they're back home now. That was the HIMSS Global Conference in Orlando last month, and they're back home, and they're agreed to share that journey with us. Some other topics here are things that we've talked about before, but we always love to hear client stories like Troy and guys about this, about what works and what doesn't. And so don't be shy. This is a low pressure, friendly group, and we're here to learn from each other. So please reach out and suggest the topic that you would like to either hear or, better yet, present about. With that, the renowned Bruce McCartney. I am friends with Bruce. He has been involved in Data Vault training as long as I've been in Data Vault, which is going on 10 years now. And Bruce, you can tell us how long it's been for you if you wish.
Sure.
But I think Bruce is one of the brightest stars in the data modeling space, especially when it comes to explaining it so the rest of us can understand. And he's here to tell us about the Agile strength of Data Vault 2.0, or in other words, that iterative building of information. So with that, Bruce, please share your screen and take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Hopefully you are seeing my screen now. Can you confirm that?
Does everybody see his?
Confirm or deny?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So welcome, everybody. The title of this story is this topic is what's the story, and really it's an attempt to try and define business intelligence a little bit through stories that the business has for desired outcomes. So I'm going to start. I don't have anything to sell here today. I just want to share some information with you. So I don't have any products or anything that you have to worry about. And just a little bit about my background is this is sort of a couple of little pictures or models of the history of my encounters with my career. And I first encountered Data Vault in the early mid 2000 range when I was doing some work for effectively an oil and gas company here in Calgary. You might notice that I'm from Canada. If you can't tell by the accent, I'm from Calgary. The background here is the city of Calgary in Western Canada, so not too far from the data enthusiasts in your region. So I've been down there. I was down working with Mike a few times, and we vacation often in your part of the world. So I met Dan. I encountered Dan back in about 2004 or 5, where he was. I was actually doing a data modeling exercise for a data warehouse project, and they wanted to have a generic data warehouse model. So I went and did some, as any good consultant would do, I did some Google searching and found that, Dan had been posting about that. And I entered into a conversation with him, and he had me talk to Kent Graziano and a few other folks to talk about what they're doing in Denver. He was working with Hans Hultgren at the time as well, developing this standard, doing some training. I took some training from him. I got certified, in 2007. I call it Data Vault 1. We didn't call it that at the time because it was just Data Vault, because both Dan and Hans were working together, teaching and expounding on the virtues of this. And it really caught my eye, and I really still think it's the best way to do data warehousing business intelligence. So that's sort of where I'm coming through. I've worked for a bunch of different companies recently. This is I did a presentation at the user group, which is actually next week. I'm not attending this year, but every year there's a worldwide Data Vault conference that people attend in Stowe, Vermont, where people talk about stuff. And I presented this, and I was talking about knowledge graphs and things like that. That's sort of a knowledge graph for me. Right now, this is not correct. PG2 was acquired by a company called Seven Rivers. So that's who I'm sort of working with right now. I'm not teaching. We're still working on contracts between the Data Vault Alliance group, who owns the training material for Data Vault 2.0. But that's sort of my journey really starts with coming from a perspective of data. I consider myself definitely a data enthusiast. I love the title of your group. It works for me, and I'm going to start this presentation with a little bit of a story. So let's go ahead and get started. So everything begins with a story, really, and the perspective you can take is I just want to apologize first of all for this graphic. I used DALL-E 3, I think, to generate this graphic, and it's just horrible, but I'm not a graphic designer, so that's my graphic design department. And I just said, I've got a man in a suit on the ground and another man kind of a little agitated flying a balloon nearby, and the man on the balloon says, "Hey, can you tell me where I am and which way I'm heading?" So the man on the ground looks at his phone and then says, "Sure, yeah, you're at 44 degrees, 28 minutes, 28.9 seconds north, 72 degrees, 42 minutes, 39.5 seconds west. You're at 252 meters above sea level." It turns out this is the exact coordinates of the Stowe Conference Center where I was presenting this last year. And right now you're hovering, but on the way here, you were moving at 1.83 meters per second and at a 1.929 radiant. Well, so the man in the balloon says, "Thanks. Hey, by the way, are you a data professional?" And I assume everybody on this call would consider themselves a data professional. I certainly do. And the gentleman said, "Yeah, I am, but how did you know?" And the man in the balloon says, basically to him, "Everything you told me is completely accurate. You gave me more detail than I needed, and you told me in such a way that it is no use at all to me." So, dang, the guy on the ground says, "By the way, are you a business executive?" And the man in the balloon shook his head in surprise and says, "Oh, wow, how did you know that?" Well, the man on the ground says, "Well, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. You got where you are by blowing hot air. You started asking questions after you got into trouble, and you're exactly the same spot you were a few minutes ago, but somehow now it's my fault." And the purpose of this story is really to illustrate there's a sort of a divide between IT and business folks, and the communication is generally not all that productive. So what we want to try to do, I think, is to really genuinely help the man in the balloon. Can we give him some data and ask what his story is so that we can actually help him instead of overwhelming him with facts or data? And in some cases, IT departments can go to great expense while not talking to the business about what they're looking to do with this data in provisioning a bunch of data for them. And then they look at it and it's no good. So that's sort of the gist of what I'm trying to talk about today. And you may or may not be familiar with Data Vault 2.0. It's basically a way to do business intelligence. We call it a system of business intelligence. If you define system and business intelligence this way, the system is just a group of interrelated objects that appear through rules to act as a whole. So very, very broad definition of a system. Business intelligence is really evidence-based decision making. So you're looking at data to make decisions in the business, right? It's decision analysis. There's all kinds of different terms you can use on it, but it's a system. So Data Vault 2.0 arose from a model that Dan Lindstad developed a long time ago, back in the late 90s and early 2000s. He tried to patent it. He's made his living on developing this model and making it better and better and better. So there's three components to the model. It's first and foremost a data warehouse model. So it uses the concept of a data warehouse that was introduced by Bill Inman back in Calgary, back in the early 90s when he was working for Shell. They came up with the term and the pattern for data warehousing, which is a collection of data for decision-making purposes. But Dan is also value added to that by specifying a bit of an architecture that he borrowed basically from Inman. So we'll talk about the architecture, but basically the data warehouse sits in the middle. You've got data coming in and information coming out of it. And that's the way that we sort of view it. And then the last part that he talks about is the methodology. And what Dan has, I think, led the charge for data warehousing in as an industry using agile processing. When I started looking at data warehousing back in the 90s, we were not agile. We were very, very much a waterfall, and the problem of those waterfall approaches gets exasperated when things change, right? You have to crush and rebuild your entire data warehouse. You're going to lose funding eventually, and that's what happened to many data warehouse programs in the past. So when we talk about this as a triangle of three things, this is a Penrose triangle. They're all interrelated. There's elements of this that interact with each other. There's parts of the methodology that tell you what to do in the data model. It's all interrelated, and it sort of works together as a system. And it really starts from the top down. And the top down methodology says we need to understand the business intention. What is the business? What's the story here? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve by our business intelligence program in general? Because it's generally not a project. It should be thought of as a program. It's something that's ongoing. It's changing the way you make decisions by using data as evidence, right? So Data Vault 2 uses the Agile methodology. If you haven't, experienced the Agile methodology, the one that we recommend is called Disciplined Agile Delivery, and it was developed by Scott Ambler and Mark Lies, who's from Calgary. Scott's from Toronto, and more recently they've actually sold that methodology to the Project Management Institute. So it's a mainstream way to do agile delivery, but you can use basically any agile approach that you have. And it really starts with story. They all start with a story. What is it we're trying to do? We want to talk about what success looks like. If we do this well, how does that impact your business? This is all from a business perspective, not from a technology perspective. The technology is important, but it's sort of the last thing that we need to worry about when we're coming from a top-down perspective. We want to understand what the business is trying to do. And generally, that's always been the role of the business analyst or the persona of that role in many projects has sort of been, I think, somewhat de-emphasized sometimes. There are some resources. If you're not familiar with this, there's the Business and Analysis Body of Knowledge, the BA-BOK it's called, and you can benefit from that. It's available. There's a meta model published for free on this. You can benefit also from large language modules like ChatGPT have read the BA-BOK and can help you interpret the different steps on it. So it's I think I've got an article here, and this is recorded. I will also share the slides with you, so don't worry about the font on these things and clicking on these links. You can get a PDF of these after the presentation. Hopefully, I can send that to you, Mike. All right, so that's our job. Let's figure out what the intention of the business is. So how do you do that? Well, I asked ChatGPT, what are the questions we should ask the business leaders to uncover the value of business intelligence? And this is basically a summarization of some of the questions that you can use to get the conversation started, to find out what the story is on the business. What do you want to do with this data? What are your strategic, you can read these. These are really good examples of how the business can start thinking about how they could use data to make decisions, better decisions in how they do it. So when you build a story, and Scott now refers to these informational stories as question stories. I was calling them data stories at the time. They're not function stories. They're not software development features. They're really questions or information or data centric. So it's a little different than a feature. It's actually data stories. So the things you need, and this sort of order of importance here, somebody needs to be the owner of that story. So as a business analyst who's doing forecasting for sales, I need something, right? So you, as a person or as a role, I need um, something, and then you can go down through the different other criteria that you have there. You can have an acceptance criteria. So this is good enough. This is the priority, estimation, and those kinds of things. You start asking a bunch of questions to formulate the story as you go through to determine what you're going to do. And stories can have, they can be sub stories as well. So you can have one main story for your BI program. Literally, our objective is to digitize and do a transformation to the cloud and be able to, get answers to our questions within a minute or something like that. So there's all kinds of stories associated with that. And when you talk to organizations, it's especially if you're talking to business leaders about what what it is they're intending to do. One of the things that I've done a few times with business folks is use the CMMI, the Capability Maturity Model Integration approach, which is basically a 5 level uh, set of characteristics and capabilities, and describing those capabilities at level one is usually it's called ad hoc, and it says you've got little focus on data driven decision making. So that's maybe what you do in an assessment is you come in and say, this is where we are today, and you interview some of the business folks, and you can drill down. I've done this on the DAMA wheel at a capability level as well. You can get very specific in terms of what you want to be able to move the organization's capabilities through. So, it's a continuum from where you are today, and maybe this is where you want to be down here, where you've got, data fully embedded into the decision-making process. It's a continuum, and really what you want to be able to do is develop a path that gets you from here to there, or maybe you don't want to go all the way to there. Maybe you want to just get to, be ready for stage 3 and then move on and do some other stuff. So this is a useful model to talk about the business, about how you're going to go about doing this stuff as you build your stories. Because what you want to do with data, data is evidence, and really what people do with this is analyze it. Analytics is really what business intelligence is trying to do. So there's another, sort of maturity model from an analytic perspective that you need to understand as well when you're talking to the business. And the first level is generally described as descriptive. Descriptive analytics is really trying to determine what happened. And in large organizations with multiple divisions and acquisitions and all kinds of things like that, this can be very, very challenging to understand what's happened and be able to report revenue back to on a timely basis. We used, when I started in my career, we had month end. Month end was a big deal, and everybody posted month end and then spent the rest of the month correcting it, right? And nowadays people don't do that much on month end. It's sort of day end for the most part, and in many organizations it's as it's happening. So you have to describe what's happening, be able to accurately determine what's going on in your organization so that you can move to the next level, which is called diagnostic analytics. And diagnostic analytics is really trying to answer the question, why did this happen? So you look at what happened and develop what they call key performance indicators. And this is a graphic from the KPI Institute that really gives a real good view of what a KPI is. And you can actually go there and build some from them. You can be in workshops with business for days determining what the KPI is. It can get kind of political. So it's nice to sometimes just go to somebody else and say, here's a KPI that we need to look at. in order to diagnose what's happening over time. You know, a KPI can tell you whether you're getting better or whether you're getting worse at what you're doing. And if you have KPIs, you put them in a dashboard, and you know, that's sort of generation one of business intelligence. We've been doing that for 20, 30 years now, but it's getting better and better. The next level on this analytics scale or maturity model is now you want to start, you know what's happening, you kind of know why, you want to know what's going to happen next. And that's where AI comes in to play. Artificial intelligence really, it can be defined as a prediction machine. It is really using data to past data to predict future. And that's what AI can try to do, right? And there's various ways in which you can do that. It's all based on algorithms, essentially. It's just math and algorithms that are, you know, given fancy names and stuff like that. But basically, you're trying to predict. You don't have to use AI to predict. You can use people, right? Budgets, outlooks, forecasts, all of those kinds of things are all intended to try to predict what's going to happen, right? So that you can make decisions, and a decision really is defined as an un irrevocable allocation of resources. So when you make a decision, you've decided to allocate resources and you can't take it back. You've decided. So that's what we're trying to make optimal, is the decisions that the business is making. And then the final level of, I guess, the holy grail is prescriptive analytics. Is not only can I know what's happened and why and what's going to happen, but what should I do about it? What course of action can I take to make something happen with that? So what's the crystal ball for that? So when you go through a model and you're trying to figure out what kind of information your business needs, you sort of have to slot yourself from where you are in this. I view it as a continuum, because if you don't know what's happening, it's really pretty unlikely you're going to be able to predict what's going to happen, right? You have to have a good idea of what's happened in the past in order to understand what's going to happen in the future. So the last part I want to just talk about is what is the intention to do with your analytics. So if you've decided you wanted to use predictive analytics to, you know, increase your subscriber base or something like that, right? Fraud detection, policy risk, whatever. There's different operational ways that you can use your analytics. The first and kind of the coolest way to do this is you can embed the decisions right into your business operations. So you've got fraud detection, policy risk. You can do this kind of stuff in near real time. If you've got the right, you know, if you know what's happened and you know why, you can begin to understand and do this in real time. And that's a real cool way to do your analytics operationally. You can also create descriptive dashboards, you know, scorecards, reports, all of those things, and let the business think about it. So we're not sure what we want to do with this stuff. I just want to analyze it. Give it to me, and I'll analyze it. And when I talk to business people and say, well, what do you do when you analyze? Boy, I just get blank stares. People don't understand what they actually do. They just want to be able to see the data, and then, you know, it happens. They intuit what they're trying to do with it. So you can do lots of things to make that better. You want to have good quality data, right? You want to have master data so that the reports and the dashboards describing what's happening are reliable and true, so that you can begin to increase the maturity of your organization. The one thing approach that I think it doesn't work is the build it and they will come. And I've seen this many, many times, and I'm working at a site now. I'm still fighting this battle in a lot of customer sites, is build it and they will come. And it doesn't work either way. IT can go off and build it and then invite business into it. Or in a lot of cases, business people go out and build it. They get, you know, pretty good with Excel, or they get, you know, they do their own thing. They've got their own shadow IT departments running spreadsheets that connect to other things. And that breaks down too over time. So it doesn't work when you build it and they will come. You need to sort of get together and find out what the balloon operator is trying to do, and then how can I help that happen? And that's sort of the anti-pattern here, I think, is go ahead and build it either as business or as IT without a discussion in place. So maybe you want to articulate a story and then socialize and plan it first. I know that's radical, but you know, that's sort of what I've been advocating. I also want to, you know, talk about not using data to create something called disinformation, which is, lying or using statistics to prove the point that you thought you had already gotten. And that's something that you need to sort of be aware of. That's a natural thing for humans to do, right? We have all of these cognitive biases, they're called. And this website is really great. There's a hierarchy. They're all explained. It's amazing how much science we have around how bad our decision-making processes are affected by cognitive bias. So just be aware of that so that you're not, using data that has already got some conclusions built into it, and all you're doing is justifying a decision you've already made. And the way that you combat this is have the story. What's the decision you're trying to make? And then use a scientific approach, data science perspective, to understand what the best course of action is. So I don't want to get too far into this, but this is a book that I really do recommend that you have to understand. And I like the way that he's talked about it as dark data, because this is data that you're not using, essentially. And there's different types of it out there. And it's something that you need to consider when you're asked, once you have a story, what data do we need to make the decision on the story? And sometimes that data isn't available. It needs to be captured. It needs to be perhaps used in some sort of blind test to do it, because there isn't any data for it. So there's all kinds of ways that you can develop the data, but you want to make sure that you're not trying to, feedback and game the system, right? You're not using data that has a measurement error that make it useless. Really good discussion on that. So now we've gotten to a point where we have some data that we want to make some decisions about. How do we go about making that data into information? Because data itself is physical and information is conceptual. So what is the meaning of that data? You have to add not just the data, but also the context and meaning associated with that data. So the way that we map out the data vault architecture, is generally this way. Here's your sources. And I've sort of grayed out the data warehouse and ingestion component. That's a whole different part of any BI program. What I'm focusing here is what we call the right side of the architecture, which is really essentially making information delivery possible. We use a technique called the business data vault as an optional way to do that, where we're closer to the data. We share surrogate keys and structure and stuff like that. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is make that information available to our business so that they can make a decision. And in some cases, we can let the business have an algorithm to do the decision. Even if you've got prescriptive AI or prescriptive analytics associated with it, you can just hand it off to the system to make the decision, as long as everybody in the human world agrees that that's okay, right? That's not always the case. So I mentioned this before, there's a layer in there called a business vault, and the business vault really is an optional component. It's tightly coupled to the raw data vault. So I haven't talked about the data vault model, but it's basically business keys and relationships segregated. So we use those business keys and relationships, the identities in those things, directly and couple to those things to transform that data into perhaps a point in time view or some other view that you're interested in. So it's information that we're delivering in an information delivery area, but it's purpose built via soft business rules that can be automated. We're very big on automating and extending these things. By automation, I mean, metadata that's templated to generate the structures that are required and the necessary transformations of those structures into their targets. So what we do is usually optionally we align time. Oftentimes it's a temporal problem we're trying to solve, but you can also align space, like location and regions and stuff like that, or the grain of raw data. You've got some data coming in, at a very detailed level, and you've got to merge that with data at a different level of grain. So you've got all kinds of opportunities in the business vault to do that kind of stuff. It contains, zero, I guess, or more specialized objects. They're basically tables and views. It's a relational system, including, derived hubs and links potentially. Hubs and links are part of the raw data vault model. Hubs have business keys, links have relationships. Point in time tables are the execution of a temporal view of the data as you get it into the data warehouse. So we keep track of when we got it and when it changed. So you have lots of flexibility and to do multi-temporal analysis on your data. A bridge table allows you to join together maybe data that isn't actually joined in your operations system. So you might want to bring in something else like, I don't know, the weather or people's, personality, there's all kinds of things you can bring in. So a bridge table allows you to do that. It's kind of, it can operate and drive the grain of facts in a dimensional model that we'll talk about here in a minute. The third kind of table that we have, it's called a satellite. And a satellite is just time-dependent derived context. It's everything else that's not identifying. So the keys are kept in hubs and links. Everything else is in a satellite over time, right? And so we can compute some things. We can create those KPIs. We can put them into a computed satellite and then drop them into a fact if you want at some point, or just query them that way. There's all kinds of ways that you can get this. You can have master data. You can create a feature store for AI model execution, or you can manage reference data as well that way. So there's lots of flexibility there. We have something called a same as link for master data management for the keys. And sometimes you've got organizations that don't always call things the same identifier. They don't always call a spade a spade. Sometimes they call it a shovel. And when we load that data in, we want to get a view by all of the digging instruments. So we need the spades and the shovels to be equated. They're the same. That's how you can do that in a business vault. You can also virtualize all of this stuff. One of the core principles in our methodology is virtualize until you need to physicalize. So we can virtualize, meaning views, or you can also use virtualized technology platforms if you want storage virtualization or data virtualization. But in a relational system, views are suffice to do that. You can do that, and then if you need to physicalize it, what you end up doing is just writing it down to a table, right? A view is simply just a stored SQL statement. So if you run the view and store it in a table, then you've got a materialized view or a target table. It's pretty straightforward. All right, so the information delivery area sits also, one of the areas that the business vault is a part of, but there's also other information delivery models that I want to just talk on. By far the number one model that we look at is the dimensional model. It's still the best way, I think, for people to slice and dice what happened. And those people that are in the descriptive and in a little bit into the diagnostic analytics, this is a really good way to do that. And so dimensional model we'll talk about. Another way to look at that, though, is use linked data, semantic webs and knowledge graphs to get not only the what happened and sort of KPIs, but also some of the meaning around that, the knowledge associated with that you can derive from something like a semantic web or knowledge graph. Or you might want to just flatten the data and create a feature store or a data hub that people can go to get a master. If somebody needs to know the cost of a widget in this organization, they can go here to get that, right? As a flat wide thing that many BI tools can operate very well. You can look at the unified star schemas and that kind of thing. So the information delivery area is really defined as anything derived from the raw data. We are very careful about not changing the raw data. We want to be auditable back to the system that created this data. So we don't change that data on the way into the data warehouse. That was the key problem that we had back in the 90s, is because we changed it on the way in. If the weight we did to it had to change, everything had to change. So that was a real, I think, great innovation that Dan sort of invented by using the data vault. We call soft business rules are the ones that we apply once we've loaded the data to create information. So that means we don't have to conform our dimensions. We can create multiple versions of the same star schema because the star schema is not the data warehouse. It's an information delivery mart, right? So it can be driven from your data warehouse. So you don't have to have chain and dependent stars. If you do it the other way for any length of time, you probably know what I'm talking about. So you can avoid dependencies in your architecture this way, leverage versioning of your information model, your star schemas, and that kind of stuff for data ops is really, really powerful. So it's really good. So the first sort of structure that we see in information delivery areas is still the star schema, or the cube dimensional model is what it's called. It's a ubiquitous approach, right? And for ad hoc data analysis, it's pretty good because it requires low maturity and easy egress. It's easy to understand. You can slice and dice by dimensions, and this is something people naturally understand. But how do you do it? Well, there's a couple of choices, but I think I've got three. The first one is you can do a legacy refactor using new technology. So you're doing a technology uplift and you reverse engineer what's already there. Maybe that you have a star schema that people kind of like. There's a few problems with it that you want to understand, but you're going to sort of re-platform this and reverse engineer. It's kind of a tedious problem, but it's also something you want to be cautious about, because what you have to be careful about is trying to regenerate and restate existing data warehouses. That if you do that, you are, committing yourself to the life for that data warehouse. So you want to, if you're trying to get rid of it, you want to sort of architect it out of the picture and not keep it there. A nicer, I think, happy place is a greenfield net new design. So there's a couple of ways you can create a new star schema. One is called a raw data mart, and that's something that you can generate. There's no soft rules automation. We just build from the raw data vault. We can build a star schema using mappings, and it's a really good way to get people access to the data in a way that they can use a tool that they're familiar with. If you've got Power BI or business objects or Tableau or whatever that understands facts and dimensions, you can make the facts and dimensions available, and you can do this even by a view, or if you want to do it physically, you can generate all of this without talking to the business about what they would like to see. In fact, it's a way in which you can engage the business. Here's your data, and if you don't tell us anything else, we're done. We're done here, and they'll quickly tell you. It's very hard for them to tell you what they want. It's very easy for them to tell you what they don't want. So if you show them the data and say this is what you get unless you tell me something better, it gives you a way to iterate away from that. So this is what this sort of algorithm it does. It generates a star schema, and then you can use that. Maybe you're done. Maybe the business can take that star schema and then they go off and have fun with it. They develop a business objects universe that makes it useful. Or you start a gap analysis that says, okay, this is our starting point. And now what do we need to do? And you can iterate through that. And it's pretty good. There's a thing called a unified star that Pupini, I believe, Francois or Francesco Pupini has developed it, and Bill Enman actually supports it. I haven't actually done it, so I left that one as something that I think it sounds interesting. It's basically a big table of everything. We generate something similar to that if you pick all of everything in a raw data vault, raw data mart, sorry. You can always use Kimball. Kimball's the guy who invented the dimensional model, I guess, and sort of popularized it, between 1996 and 2013. Some of those things are not applicable. There's a bunch of stuff in his methodology, because his methodology, he's building a data warehouse. So he's using the dimensional model as the data warehouse, keeping track of history over time and all data. And we're not doing that. So we can shortcut and alleviate some of those things. And a newer approach that I like, and it was developed by Lawrence Carr, and I've taken the training from him, called Beam is the name of the process. The book is Agile Data Warehouse Design. Really good. We use this and have used it for years as a modification of this. It's still building a star schema as the data warehouse. So there's some things that we don't need to do in there, but there's lots of good artifacts for how to agilely hold workshops and fill in the details on what the facts and dimensions need to be. So that's a real happy spot there. So that's dimensional model. The linked data is all about the relationships. You can use a property graph or a knowledge graph, and those two are two different things. A property graph, the proper name is, I guess, a labeled property graph. Graph is nodes, edges, and properties. It's like a key value pair, but there's not a lot of formality to it, and it can be used very efficiently for specific use cases because it's easier to get stuff out of it than a formal knowledge graph, right? They use things like this to do the Panama Papers. If you remember how that was done, the reporters used a graph. I think it was Neo4j graph that listed all these documents and just listed the relationships between them. And then they were able to say, oh, that all I could trace that all the way back, to the Prime Minister of Iceland, and he gets fired for it. So it was pretty cool. So that's what a property graph kind of looks like. Neo4j is a real good tool for that. The knowledge graph has more formality to it, and it's much more powerful, I think. It's an RDF type of graph that's used by the semantic web. So it's enabling us to link things together in a formal way. And it has nodes and edges, and everything is defined by this magic triple: subject, object, predicate. And it turns out you can represent any knowledge with those three things. And that's what language does, right? And so there's a real tie to this, as well as to large language models, to try and integrate this kind of graph into your information, right? It has what they call inherent composability, which means that I can merge graphs together. So if I'm talking about people and I run into me and I know Dan Lindstad, I kind of link into Dan's network of people. The best example I've seen of this is ancestry.com, which I got as a gift, Christmas gift 2 or 3 years ago, and lost myself in for hours. And I found out a distant cousin had also done his family tree. And once I linked up with his tree, my tree became our tree, right? And that's the power of the knowledge graphs. And I did a presentation at the Data Vault conference in 2022 about this. The last thing you need to do, though, to do this knowledge graph is really understand what your ontology is in a formal way, right? It's semantics. It's a concept model that can help you deal with the concepts in your business. It's not the technology and it's not the data, it's the concept. So a formal ontology is something like OWL, or there's a RDF subgraphs. There's various versions of this that are available to you, and they're a little bit hard to get going with. And I find that people struggle a little bit, but the tools are getting much better now. Data.world has got wonderful tools for this. There's all kinds of different ways in which people can build these things now. You can also do an informal ontology using a concept model, right, with some extra pieces on it. Because if you use a concept model, in my view anyway, is that you need to have a concept model to build a data vault, because you have to identify your business keys. And to know that something's a business key, it has to identify a unique semantic meaning in a business concept. So this is sort of a roadblock. If you don't have at least an idea of a concept model, you're going to build this thing called a source system data vault, which is really paying no attention to the business, and it's just sort of mechanically integrating things, and it's really not solving your problem. It's not a good way of doing this. And there's lots of resources out here. These are the three that I've sort of found very good on an informal ontology. John Giles, fantastic. Ronald Ross has a couple of books on it. This is John. These are just general books on business knowledge messaging and the Nimble Elephant. John Giles is a fellow from Australia. He's just a wonderful author and presenter, and he's got a new book called The Elephant in the Fridge, which is about Data Vault, which is kind of a weird name, but it's worth picking up. And he gives us a sort of a template of a high level, ontology, relationships between different types of things. So the underlying things would be the top level ontology in this case. There's other top level ontologies out there. And again, I did a presentation on this in the past. Ronald Ross is really good about defining terms and rules unambiguously. He's got a new book that's really focused on the rules. It's fantastic. This is how you communicate. You develop a controlled vocabulary so that when somebody says client, everybody knows what it means, or policy, or security. We have a definition of what those things are with no ambiguity in it. That's what we're after. So a concept model is just a description of the business terms in terms of what. So we focus on the things, beam and dimensional modeling focuses on the events. I think we focus on the things that participate in the events to start with. So things are what the business needs to maintain its records, right? Core business things. The business could not exist without these things. Those become core business entities, which end up being hubs in the long run, right? But facts about those things include relationships and attributes. So oftentimes the attributes are the state that it's in right now, but there's also relationships with it. So customer is now is a customer because they've bought something with one of our products, that kind of thing, the relationships. And then you go to as much detail as you need to talk about the policies and the rules associated with it. How do you get to be a customer? What defines a customer? There's definitional rules that say what's in and what's out. And once you get those down, you save all kinds of confusion later on. And I'm at a site now that I can't talk them into it. I just keep pointing out cases where if you had a definition of what you mean by this, we'd be a long way ahead. So it starts with the terms, and then you end up with what's called a controlled vocabulary. And with a controlled vocabulary, the ambiguity of your business intelligence system goes away. So it's a communication tool. It's a form of disambiguation. And the criteria for things, you can sort of read that. It's a singular noun. It's something we can discuss one of them, but we have multiples of them that we can uniquely identify by a countable business key, right? And it has facts recorded about it and maintained. We do that in our operations. It's acted on by processes. We do stuff to it, so it makes sense in a verb-noun pair, right? And sometimes when we do something to it, it changes its state. Very, very simple thing that every business person can understand. The essence of this. We don't worry about the how, we worry about the thing and what we do with it. And then we search for perhaps some counterfactuals or examples where that's not true. We do that most of the time, except when blah, 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 which means we have to adjust our context or our domain. Business objects. Now, once you've got the things participate in relationships. So it's an association. Dan calls that a unit of work. It's a relationship, an association, right? It's at the conceptual level. The events are in the business. Now, we later on, we go look for those in the data, right? And that's what feeds links associated in our model. So we have look for taxonomies where we've got levels of things, is of relationships in your terms. So as a prospect, a customer, a person, an entity, a thing, those kinds of hierarchies are useful to understand and then reuse some frameworks for you. So there's a whole bunch of resources available on the net. There's a couple from the U of A. That's not the University of Alberta or Alabama. It's actually Amsterdam, which is where Alex Sharp lives these days, but they've got a whole bunch of videos on that. You can use John Giles's top level or schema.org or KBpedia. There's all kinds of ways in which you can start. BFO is another one, a basic formal ontology. Very simple things. You've got, they call them independent constituents and occurrences, but that's basically what we're talking about. So let's wrap this up, and I hopefully will have a few minutes for any questions or comments if anybody has any. A conceptual model, I feel, is a must at some level because you can't identify your hubs without it. So the prerequisite, and if you don't do that, you're going to end up with a source system model with hundreds of hubs because you get to call a hub whatever you want, and that's not the idea. Now, Data Vault Tech 2 is a system of BI. You need to develop a system of BI, and then there's many choices for informating is a term that Shoshana, somebody or other, I forget her name. Oh boy, now I'm blocked on it. Anyway, it's taking data and making information. It's asking questions and then formulating an idea about that data. Right. And that's really what we have, lots of choices to do that. But it really all begins with a story. And if you don't have the story, then the story becomes not a business story, it's an IT story. and it becomes a technology project, and it becomes something that really is going to have struggling to get business buy-in and long-term, financing for it. So as a bonus, I think information delivery can also, look at delivering knowledge and wisdom. So if you understand and look up DIKW, it starts with data. Data is physical, it's evidence, and we keep track of it. But everything else above that is conceptual. It's knowledge based until you write it back as data. So knowledge can be stored as data. The way you store it as data, the best way now, it seems to be the knowledge graph. Right? That 3 subject, predicate, object thing, that it's triples and a bunch of them. They're, representing axioms. And then wisdom is really what you use that data for in making your own decisions as a business. All right, so that's the end of my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to open it up to any questions, or I'll throw it back to you, Mike, if anybody's got any questions. I could chat for a bit, or I can give you some time back.
Well, questions, comments from the audience, first of all. Don't be shy.
I wanted to say, this is Caitlin. I wanted to say thank you. So I know our team, or I guess my company, full disclosure, I'll try to be somewhat nice, but we are still working on even designing our warehouse, putting real modeling into it. And it's something I know our team has been talking about, either doing Data Vault or even Kimball. But it's something that is a huge challenge for us in general. Because we're very much stuck in, we've always done it that way. And while they keep saying we want to be prescriptive, right? We're still very reactionary. And so I took that to heart on those steps, right? Trying to get people to understand you need data and you need information to eventually get to where you need to be, right? And to outline your data so you can share stories, show how things are related. And I know we're getting there slowly, but it's like a half step at a time.
Yeah, and it's some of the stories that we have to combat are we've always done it this way. And there's a great story that starts with a family, a wife cooking ham dinner for Thanksgiving, and she cuts the ends off of that. Have you heard that one?
Yeah.
Yes. And it turns out that the story is back her great grandmother, the oven was too small to fit a full ham in, so they cut the edges off of it. But that kind of behavior continues because we've got social proof, that's the bias associated with it, that this is always what we've done, and we continue to do that. So you have to sort of remain curious and question those, we've always done it that way. And some people don't react well to that, but there's techniques that you can use. Yeah, thanks for the feedback.
And convincing people on the ROI, right? Like how that'll be worth it, because it's that upfront change. There's always work in everything. And I think that's kind of where we're at from a struggle, because we can get stuff done, but it's just not very efficient.
Yeah.
Or accurate, probably. We'll be real here.
Yeah. Any other comments, Kathy?
Kathy, I have a comment here. Excellent presentation. I've been involved in data for a long time. But yeah, this was really good, and it did point out some things that we've done across our journey. That okay, there's a couple things I need to go and start stirring up a little bit more.
Good. Well, that's awesome, because it helps us. We want to move forward, right? We want to help the business. I as a data professional, I want to help the business. That's where I get my fun from, and that's not fun when I build stuff that people don't use because they never wanted it. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that in my career, because it's embarrassing. We haven't done a real good job of it. So that's sort of my sort of takeaway. Thanks, Kathy. Any other comments, questions?
Well, thank you, Bruce. We appreciate you coming and speaking with us today. It's always enlightening. I'm sorry I'll miss you at the Data Vault conference next week.
Yep.
But anybody else who wants to grab a last minute ticket to Vermont is welcome to come and learn more about Data Vault. It's a very collaborative conference.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good speakers for sure.
So wrapping up here, any additions to our invite list or feedback, please email one of these two email addresses here. For future topics, we do have, we're always looking for more of these, but we do have two of them coming up. So I mentioned Troy and Shai, and then actually that's in June. In May, David Hay, a renowned author, will be speaking to us about data modeling. So please mark your calendars for this. An invite will be coming out shortly. And with that, we are finished for the day. We can stop the recording, and we'll be sending out a link to that. Thank you all for attending the April 2024 edition of Treasure Valley Data Enthusiasts. Have a great day.
Mike.